Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. We often think of marriage as the ultimate union of two souls, a sacred vow of love and protection. But what if the greatest threat to that union wasn't human infidelity or worldly strife? What if it was something far older, far more powerful, and venomously jealous? Imagine a wedding chamber, not as a sanctuary of love, but as a recurring tomb. Imagine a bride. This isn't a modern horror story. It is an ancient account from a text that sits in the shadow of the Old Testament, the Book of Tobit. It tells the story of a demon king, a being of immense power and insatiable lust, whose name has echoed through centuries as a symbol of carnal corruption, Asmodeus. But this story is more than just a chilling legend. It is a tale of unwavering faith in the face of absolute despair, a celestial chess match played with human lives, and the journey of an unlikely hero guided by one of heaven's most powerful archangels in disguise. Forget what you think you know about simple demonic possession. The story of Asmodeus and the tragic bride Sarah is a complex saga of supernatural obsession, divine strategy, and a terrifying confrontation in the dead of night that would decide the fate of a family and bind a demon king forever. Our story begins not in the halls of heaven or the fiery pits of hell, but in the quiet despair of a young woman named Sarah, living in the... She was a woman of virtue and renowned beauty, the kind of beauty that seemed blessed by the divine. Yet her life was a tapestry woven with threads of unimaginable sorrow. She had been given in marriage 7 times, and 7 times she had become a widow before the sun could rise on her new life. One by one, her husband's righteous and hopeful men had entered the bridal chamber with her, only to be found. A horrifying invisible force had claimed them, leaving Sarah untouched but utterly broken, a pariah in her own community. The whispers followed her like a plague. Some called her cursed, others, more cruel, accused her of murdering her own husbands. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her soul until she could barely breathe. Her father, Raguel, a good and pious man, he loved his daughter, but he too was powerless against this unseen predator that stalked his family. On one particularly dark day, after being cruelly insulted by one of her father's maids, Sarah's spirit finally broke. She retreated to an upper room in her father's house, her mind a storm of grief and shame. She resolved to end her life, to hang herself and escape the relentless torment. But then, a thought pierced through her despair, the shame it would bring upon her aging father. She could not bear to be the cause of his final, ultimate sorrow, so she chose a different path. Instead of succumbing to the darkness, she fell to her knees, spread her hands toward the heavens, and prayed. It was not a gentle prayer, but a raw, desperate cry to God. She pleaded for death, for an end to her. She had no idea who or what was responsible for her suffering. She couldn't know that she was the object of a possessive and deadly obsession. The entity haunting her was Asmodeus, a name that in later traditions would mean the destroyer. He was a demon king, a powerful prince of the underworld, and he considered Sarah his. In his twisted, infernal perception, he was her rightful spiritual husband, and any mortal man who dared to claim her was an intruder, a rival to be eliminated with cold, swift fury. He was the shadow in her wedding chamber, the silent executioner fueled by a lust so possessive it could only destroy, never create. A very same moment that Sarah was pouring out her soul in desperate prayer in Ecbatana, hundreds of miles away in the Assyrian city of Nineveh, another prayer of anguish was ascending to heaven. It came from a man named Tobit. Tobit was a righteous man, a devout Israelite from the tribe of Naphtali, who had been carried into exile. Even in a foreign land surrounded by pagan influences, he clung fierce. He was known for his charity, his kindness, and especially for one dangerous act of piety. He would secretly bury the bodies of his fellow Israelites, who had been executed by the tyrannical king Sennacherib, and left in the streets. This was a capital offense. One evening, after performing one such burial, he was rendered ritually unclean and had to sleep outside in his courtyard. As he slept, for 4 years this man of unwavering faith was plunged into darkness, unable to work, dependent on his wife, Anna, and the charity of others. His faith was tested to its limits. He was mocked, even by his own wife, who once asked him in frustration, "Where are your charities and your righteous deeds? Behold, you and all your works are known." The words cut him deeper than any sword broken in two souls, a young woman tormented by a demon, and an old man afflicted by blindness, both righteous, both in despair, sent their prayers to the heavens at the same instant, and the scripture tells us that the prayer of them both was heard before the glory of the great God. The time for divine intervention had arrived, the celestial gears were beginning to turn, and the solution to both their impossible problems was about to be set in motion. He wanted to set his affairs in order. He remembered a large sum of money, 10 talents of silver, that he had deposited years ago with a man named Gabael in the distant city of Rages. In Media, this was a fortune enough to secure his son's future. The journey, however, was long and perilous. Tobias was a good and dutiful son, but he was young and inexperienced. He didn't know the way, nor did he know anyone in Media. Tobias went out, and almost immediately he found a man standing ready, girded for a journey. The young man was handsome and poised, radiating an aura of quiet confidence. Tobias, having no idea of the stranger's true nature, asked him, "Where are you from, young man?" The stranger replied, "I am one of your brethren, the children of Israel, and I have come here to work." When Tobias asked, this was an unbelievable stroke of luck. Tobias rushed back to his father, who, despite his blindness, wanted to speak with the guide himself. Tobit asked the man his name and his tribe. The stranger, concealing his celestial identity, gave a simple, human name. "I am Azariah, the son of the great Hananiah, one of your kinsmen." The name itself was a hidden clue. Unbeknownst to them, they were speaking with the Archangel Raphael, one of the 7 holy angels who present the prayers of the saints and enter into the presence of the glory of the Holy One. Raphael, whose name means God heals, had been dispatched from heaven with a threefold mission: to drive the demon Asmodeus from Sarah, to give Sarah to Tobias as a wife, and to heal Tobit his blindness. The stage was now set for it would be a guided quest into the heart of a supernatural battle. The journey began. Tobias, his dog, and the disguised angel set off. As they made their camp for the first night by the banks of the mighty Tigris River, a monstrous fish leaped from the water to attack Tobias. The young man cried out in fear, but his guide, Azariah, was calm. "Seize the fish," he commanded. "Do not let it go." Then the angel gave him a strange and specific set of instructions. He was to cut the fish open and remove its heart, its liver, and its gallbladder, and to keep them safe. He told Tobias that these parts were powerful medicines. The gall could be used to anoint eyes afflicted with white films and restore their sight. And the heart and liver, their purpose was far more dramatic. When their smoke was made to rise before him, Tobias was intrigued, but he could not possibly have understood the true significance of these bizarre trophies. He was holding the very keys to his family's salvation, the weapons for a spiritual war he didn't even know he was about to fight. Raphael was arming the young, unsuspecting hero, preparing him for the confrontation that lay ahead. Every step of their journey was part of a divine plan, leading Tobias. As they traveled deeper into Media, drawing closer to their destination, Raphael began to unveil the true purpose of their quest. He turned to Tobias and said, "Tonight we must stay with Ragel. He is your kinsman, and he has a daughter named Sarah. She is your closest relative, and it is your right and duty to marry her. Her father's inheritance is rightfully yours." Tobias was horrified. "The story of Sarah was," he replied with terror in his voice. "Brother Azariah, I have heard that she has been given to 7 husbands, and that they all died in the bridal chamber on the night they went into her. I have heard it said that a demon kills them. I am my father's only son. I am afraid that if I go in, I will die, just as the others did, and I will bring my father and my mother's lives to the grave with sorrow over me." His fear was palpable and completely. Would he shrink back in fear, or would he trust his mysterious guide? It is in moments like these that the true nature of faith is revealed, not as a blind leap, but as a courageous step forward, guided by a trusted voice in the face of overwhelming terror. This celestial being, Raphael, had a plan to confront a demon king, And if you want to see how this epic battle between a young man and a primordial force unfolds, seeing the fear in Tobias's eyes, Raphael's tone became firm, reassuring, and filled with divine authority. He was no longer just a travel guide, he was a mentor preparing his charge for battle. "Do you not remember the words of your father?" he asked, reminding Tobias of his duty. Then he revealed the secret. "Now listen to me, brother, for she shall be your wife. And do not worry about that. A smoke and a smell will arise, and when the demon smells it, he will flee and will never be seen near her again." He laid out the battle plan with perfect clarity. This was not a physical fight. It was a ritual, an act of spiritual warfare using sanctified elements. But Raphael's instructions didn't stop there. He added a crucial spiritual component. "And when you are about to come together with her, both of you must first stand up and do not be afraid, for she was set apart for you before the world was made. You will save her, and she will go with you." This was a staggering revelation. This marriage was not a matter of chance or even family obligation. It was a predestined event, a part of God's cosmic plan. Tobias was not just a potential eighth victim, he was the designated savior, chosen before the world was made. The words of his guide, filled with an unshakable certainty, began to extinguish the flames of his fear, replacing them with a flicker of courage. He agreed he would face the demon. He would claim his destined bride. They arrived at the home of Raguel in Ecbatana. The meeting was emotional. Raguel and his wife, Edna, recognized Tobias as the son of their kinsman Tobit and wept to hear of his father. When Tobias announced his intention to marry Sarah that very night, a shadow passed over Raguel's face. He was filled with a terrible dread. He tried to dissuade Tobias, telling him the truth of the 7 dead grooms, his voice heavy with the grief of a father who has dug too many graves. But Tobias was resolute. "I will not eat or drink until you have settled this matter with me," he insisted. His courage bolstered by Raphael's promise. With a heavy heart, he took his daughter Sarah's hand and placed it in Tobias's, giving them a formal blessing filled with more sorrow than joy. "May the God of heaven prosper you both," he said, his words catching in his throat. While the wedding contract was being written, Edna prepared the bridal chamber, weeping as she did so. She embraced her daughter, telling her, "Be of good cheer, my daughter, the Lord of heaven grant you joy," but her words were a thin veil over her terror. As soon as Tobias and Sarah had eaten and were ready to retire for the night, Raguel's actions betrayed his true feelings. He slipped out to the courtyard and began to dig a grave. He was certain that Tobias would be dead by morning, and he wanted to bury him quickly and quietly before sunrise to avoid further public shame. The tension in the household was thick enough to suffocate. The fate of everyone involved hung in the balance, suspended in the silent, watchful air of that bridal chamber. Sarah was weeping, her heart a fragile thing, caught between a sliver of hope and the crushing weight of past trauma. Tobias, clutching the small pouch containing the fish's heart and liver, walked into the room. He was no seasoned warrior or exorcist. He was a young man far from home, armed only with but he remembered Raphael's words, "Do not be afraid." He looked at Sarah, and in that moment he understood. He was not just fighting for his own life, he was fighting to free her from a nightmare that had stolen her youth and her happiness. Taking a deep breath, he walked to the incense burner. He carefully placed the fish's heart and liver upon the glowing embers. Immediately, a thick, acrid smoke. The scripture describes it simply: "When the demon smelled the odor, he fled to the uppermost parts of Egypt." But we can imagine the reality of that moment. It was not a quiet departure. It was a violent spiritual expulsion. The air in the room would have crackled with unseen energy. A shriek of pure, undiluted rage may have echoed, not in their ears but in their very souls. The sound of a primordial being of lust and destruction being forcibly torn from its obsession. Asmodeus, the king of demons, the slayer of 7 grooms, the shadow that had haunted Sarah for years, was cast out. His possessive grip was broken, and as he fled in agony and defeat, the Archangel, the divine warrior, bound the demon king, chaining him in the desolate wilderness of Egypt, ensuring he could never trouble Sarah again. The battle was over. The curse was broken. Back in the chamber, the foul presence was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Tobias turned to Sarah, whose tears had now stopped. He took her hand and said, "Get up, my sister, and let us." Together they knelt, and Tobias offered a beautiful prayer, acknowledging God's creation of Adam and Eve and the sacredness of marriage. They prayed not as a bride and groom, but as two survivors, giving thanks for their deliverance. They then lay down to sleep, and for the first time in her life, Sarah spent a wedding night in peace, safe in the arms of her husband. Meanwhile, outside, the night was long. He sent one of them to go and see if Tobias was still alive. The servant crept into the house, quietly opened the door to the bridal chamber, and peered inside. The sight that greeted her was one no one had expected to see. Tobias and Sarah were sleeping soundly, side by side, unharmed. The servant rushed back to Raguel with the news. Overcome with relief and joy, Raguel he commanded his servants to fill in the grave before the sun rose, so no one would ever know of his fearful preparations. He then declared that the wedding feast, which was supposed to last for the customary 7 days, would be extended to 14. The house that had been a place of recurring funerals was now filled with celebration, a testament to the miracle that had occurred within its walls. While the celebration was in full swing, he was bound by the 14-day feast and couldn't leave, so he asked Raphael for his help. He said, "Brother Azariah, take with you 4 servants and 2 camels, and go to Rages in Media to Gabal, and bring me the money, and bring him to the wedding feast." Raphael, the ever-faithful guide, did exactly as he was asked. He traveled to Rages, collected the money, and brought Gabal back to join the festivities. When the 14 days were over, Tobias prepared to return home to his parents, who by now would be frantic with worry. Raguel and Edna blessed him and Sarah, bestowing upon them half of all their possessions, and sent them on their way with a great entourage. The journey back was one of joy and anticipation. As they neared Nineveh, Raphael told Tobias to go on ahead of the main party with him. He had one final task to perform. "Let us rush ahead of your wife and prepare the house for her arrival." They hurried onward, the dog that had been with them since the beginning of their journey running along with them. Raphael instructed him, "As soon as you enter the house, immediately adore the Lord your God, and giving thanks to him, go to your father and kiss him. Then anoint his eyes with this gall of the fish which you have with you, and be assured that his eyes shall be presently opened, and your father." His parents, Tobit and Anna, had been counting the days, their anxiety growing with each passing moment. Anna had been sitting by the roadside every day watching for her son's return, and was the first to see him coming. She ran to tell her blind husband, "Behold, your son is coming." Tobit, old and blind, stumbled to his feet trying to make his way to the door. Tobias rushed to him, supporting him. He did exactly as Raphael had instructed. As he did, the white films began to peel away from the corners of his eyes like the skin of an egg. And then, for the first time in 4 long years, he could see. The first thing he saw was the face of his beloved son. He threw his arms around him and wept, crying out, "I see you, my son, the light of my eyes." The house was filled with tears of joy and prayers of thanksgiving. The darkness had lifted both literatively. When Tobit's sight was restored, his son was home, and he had brought with him a virtuous wife and a great fortune. The prayers of the 2 suffering souls had been answered beyond their wildest dreams, but there was one last piece of the puzzle to be revealed. Tobit called his son and told him they must pay his guide, Azariah, for his invaluable help. They offered him half of all they had brought back. But the guide had a different reward. It is good to keep the secret of a king, but it is honorable to reveal and confess the works of God. He then recounted the trials they had all endured. Tobit, his burials of the dead, his blindness, Sarah's torment and her prayers. He told them, "When you and Sarah prayed, it was I who brought the record of your prayer before the Holy One." He was the divine messenger who had carried their pleas to the throne of God. He looked at them and declared, "I am Raphael, one of the 7 holy angels who stand and enter before the glory of the Lord." The 2 men were utterly terrified. They fell on their faces, struck with awe and fear in the presence of a celestial being, but the angel reassured them. "Do not be afraid, peace be with you. Bless God forever. I was not with you because of any favor on my part, but by the will of God. It was he you should bless, and behold, I am ascending to him who sent me." And with those words the Archangel Raphael vanished from their sight. They were left with the incredible, humbling reality that an angel of the Lord had walked with them, eaten with them, and guided them through the darkest chapter of their lives. God had not been distant in their suffering. He had been intimately present, sending one of his most powerful warriors to heal, to save. He is not just a symbol of lust, but of a possessive, selfish desire that seeks to own rather than to love. It is a destructive force that cannot stand the sight of true, sacred union, and will do anything to defile or destroy it. Asmodeus represents that dark impulse that corrupts love into a form of control, a jealousy that suffocates and ultimately kills. But the story is also a powerful it highlights the power of prayer, not as a passive wish, but as an active, desperate cry for help that can command the attention of heaven. It showcases the importance of faith, the courage of Tobias to walk into a death chamber armed with nothing but trust in a divine promise. And most profoundly, it reveals the nature of divine intervention. Help doesn't always come in a flash of light or with the sound of trumpets. The Archangel Raphael, God heals, walked as a man. Azariah, God has helped. It's a reminder that even when we feel most alone in our trials, a divine plan may already be in motion, and a guide may be walking beside us, unseen or in disguise, arming us with what we need to face the demons in our own lives, whether they be literal or metaphorical. The story teaches us that true. Alright, that is all for today's video. If you liked this deep dive into the story of Asmodeus, please subscribe and give it a like to support us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.